I'm Colin Sanders, and you're listening to the History Books Review. I read history books and I review them. Why the West Rules by Ian Morris. As an industrial scientist, I have learnt quite a few problem-solving tricks over the years. One of the simplest, at least in principle, is just to tabulate the data into a meaningful form. Many impossible issues that fox everyone involved suddenly become obvious if you just look at the information in a way that makes it easy to understand. It can be tedious to do, but it's often very effective. But there is a downside. You present your painstakingly assembled piece of work to your colleagues. With the hard work done for them, somebody usually grasps the issue rapidly and often claims to have solved it themselves and proceeds to give themselves a slap on the back for their penetrating insight. Nobody requires a huge amount of information to confirm their own genius. From that point on, people start to focus on the next problem, and your weeks or months of effort are rapidly forgotten. Ian Morris's Why the West Rules is a somewhat similar exercise on a much larger scale. What he has done is pull together all the data he can to try and quantify the social and economic development of different parts of the globe over a very long period indeed. Using this data, he can assess how they are doing compared to one another. The work involved must have been huge, and I don't doubt that Morris would have loved to have written a book about the process, but wisely he has put that to one side, though there is a website for anorak-wearing enthusiasts to pore over his workings, but that isn't the bit we want to know about. What we are interested in is how well people are doing, and we are really interested in how we are doing relative to other people. We want to hear how the West, i.e. us, came to be on top. And this is the story we get. The scope is enormous. It goes right back to prehistory and comes up to the present day. In fact, there is even some speculation about technologies of the future towards the end of the book. Early on, it becomes clear that there were only ever two contenders in the race to be the most advanced. The West is defined here as the culture that developed in Mesopotamia and spread out from there to cover Europe, Egypt, North Africa and the rest of the Middle East, and which later subsumed the Americas. The only rival is China. To make this point, the book opens with a fictional account of a Chinese ship visiting London in the reign of Queen Victoria. I'm not normally a fan of alternative history scenarios. A bit of speculation on what might have happened differently in the aftermath of a particular event is okay, but elaborate fights of fancy about what might have happened if Helen of Troy's nose had been a bit longer generally leave me cold. It is hard enough working out what actually happened, let alone what might have happened. But in this case, it sets the scene for the rest of the book beautifully. After all, it is such an ingrained feature of the history of the world for the last 500 years that Europeans set sail towards the rest of the world that it's a jolt to imagine that it might have worked the other way around. What we get next is the whole story of how it came to be that in the Victorian era it was British troops that arrived in Peking rather than Chinese troops in London. And it really is the whole story, going the way back as far as it can be taken. The West has almost always been in the lead, getting started first and usually maintaining its lead. But it has always been close. There have been centuries on end when China took the lead, and it very nearly beat the West to the stage of full-scale industrialisation, for example. For much of history, this race has been totally unconscious. The Chinese only became aware of the Roman Empire sometime around the reign of Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century. The Romans, in turn, never had more than the haziest notion of the other big civilization on the block, even though they did manage to trade with it via intermediaries. It wasn't until the late Middle Ages that Marco Polo brought back detailed accounts of just how advanced Chinese civilization was. During the Middle Ages, the sophistication and size of China dwarfed anything in Europe or the Middle East, and an impartial observer would no doubt have confidently predicted that it would be the Chinese who were destined to rule the world. But they had achieved this position by default, thanks to the problems and instability at the other end of the huge Eurasian continent. Later, it was to be the Chinese that succumbed to problems, leaving the West to forge ahead. Today, the situation is that both are stable enough for development to proceed. They are also very well aware of one another and interacting like never before. This is a new and unique situation in history. What will happen next? Morris can't and doesn't answer this directly, but what he does do is tell the story in enough detail to give an idea of where we are now, and it is quite a story. The economic history is used as the backbone of the book, but we get a lot of insight into how most of the time people are simply working to solve the problems they are faced with. We don't see the big picture on a day-to-day basis. You have to read a book like this to see that. Right, thanks for listening to this podcast from the History Books Review. I'll be getting back on to Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire again soon, but in the meantime, thanks for listening.